The roguish Robert Banks arrives in the Shadowcurse lands, where his enemies that threaten the world are hiding out. But whether it be armies of cultists and undead, dandy devils just waiting to cut a deal, or the aspect of a deity itself, with the proper planning, nothing will stop our hero from getting home to his loving family. Well, of course, making sure every other child along the way is safe and sound. Thus, the story of everyone's favorite paternal protector continues. Our hero steps into the Shadowcurse lands from Grimforge with all of our Until Long Rest buffs still active from the last act. But even with all these buffs, the Shadowcurse lands will still take their toll on us if we don't have a light, so we use the light cantrip from the shiny ring that we nabbed elsewhere in our journeys. As we get looking for safety, we stumble across some Harpers in the dark. Our intuition tells us they're rather good people, so we reveal ourselves, only for one of them to get abducted by the shadows themselves, and yeah, I guess he forgot his light cantrip. Either way, our first fight of the act kicks off. We immediately go for the lone shadow behind us to cover a possible retreat, taking it out with a couple of hits. Our new allies, unfortunately, are clearly not as adept at dodging blows as we are, as they kinda get obliterated. At the very least, we continue to whittle down our foes with a couple of blows at a time, not quickly enough to save the first of our friends from going down though. The surviving ones do at least manage to fight for their lives a little bit, and with our incorporeal foes being weakened, we get to take out not just one, but two on our turn. Alas, taking out two was not enough to avoid a heavy hit finally coming our way, and worst of all, it makes us do inventory management because of the strength drain. Regardless, we're able to get our revenge as well as heal up using a potion to get back into shape. Ally number 2 gets got by a shadow, shredding them to bits, but our sole remaining pal actually takes out an enemy all by himself, so at least one of them is useful. Okay, spoke too soon. Really spoke too soon, good lord. Welp, with no borderline toddlers left to babysit and just a couple enemies left, this fight is more than easy enough to wrap up in just 2 turns. We were really hoping they could show us where to go next, but I guess we'll just keep walking down the road and see where it leads. Sure enough, we find their HQ right nearby. Unfortunately, their greetings could really use some work, as Jaheira here instantly tries to restrain us. Because of this tadpole, she thinks we're a true soul, but before things can get out of hand, one of the whippersnappers we helped from Act 1 shows up to vouch for us. Once we're free to roam the grounds, we have a chat with Mattis, who sells us the Cloak of Cunning Broom. This bad boy is the most powerful item we will ever get, as it makes it so whenever we disengage, we create a small fog cloud around us. I'm sure some of you get what makes this broken already, but I'll leave it a surprise for a bit longer for those of you who don't know. We also have a quick chat with Damon in order to get the flawed Helldust gloves, which give 1d4 extra fire damage on all of our weapon attacks, making us that much stronger. With a bit more power in hand, we go chat with Jaheira, who offers us a drink, and we're able to sniff out that it's laced with truth serum. We appreciate the roguish nature of her act and decide to play along. Once we tell her we mean no harm, she tells us all about Ketheric Thorm, the leader of the cultists in the area. He's stationed at Moonrise Towers, but the big monkey wrench in our plan is that he's also a wee bit immortal. Still, it's nothing that we can't figure out, so off to Moonrise we go. Since the curse gets worse as we get closer to the towers, these Harpers offer to help us raid a cultist convoy to steal their means of protection. Once we're in position, we get spotted and have to think fast as this, Spider-Man menace stares us down with all 8 of his eyes. It's clear the lantern he's holding is his means of protection, so we tell him the Absolute said he's gotta give it to us. And then we just tell him and his cultist cronies to saunter off into the cold dark, all in a day's work. The lantern seems to be fueled by a living pixie, who naturally we let go. In return, she gives us a blessing to resist the curse, no lantern required. With this, we're able to walk right down the road uninterrupted all the way to Moonrise Towers, wherein we find some goblins begging for mercy from the General Thorm, who doesn't seem inclined to give it to them. Yeah, I'm not sure if stabbing the immortal man was the best play. And just that quick, off on his smoke break he goes. And up to level 6 we go, which unfortunately is kind of a dead level, just granting more HP and expertise with deception and intimidation for a little more out of combat utility. Now that we're free to roam Moonrise, we swing by a Raj Oblodra to yoink the risky ring right out of her pocket. This little trinket makes it so we have advantage on all of our attacks, ensuring that we can always land a sneak attack at the cost of having disadvantage on all of our saving throws. Obviously, this is a risky trade-off, but with our new cloak, we're not concerned. That aside, we also swing upstairs to talk to Kethric's lady in charge, who instantly starts hitting on us, but I mean, who can resist the old Bobby Banks charm? She even tries to impress us by killing her own bodyguard? I get the feeling she's gonna regret that one a little bit later. Either way, we put on the moves and get her to spill the beans about what exactly is going on here, and she mentions that Kethric's compadre Balthazar is retrieving a very important relic from the Thorm family mausoleum, so we've got our next big destination in mind. Before that, however, we decide to look around the Last Light Inn for more power-ups, ending up in their basement fighting a whole myriad of Meenlocks. With the surprise round, we easily take out the first of them. Then next round, we fall into the routine that we'll be doing for the rest of the playthrough. We stab an enemy with a weapon, take a step back, and then disengage to make a fog cloud with our cloak before hiding in it to end our turn. If you remember how hiding in a fog cloud works from the last video, this means the enemies all sit around passing their turns, doing absolutely nothing. The only concern that we have is we need to make sure to make the fog clouds separate from each other, lest they combine and gain the duration of the first fog cloud, since they last for just 2 rounds. And also, if we hide too close to the edge of a fog cloud, enemies will be able to search for us, ending initiative in the process. That aside, it turns out Meenlocks are just as easy to pick as regular locks. Off of one of their corpses, we pick up the Covert Cowl, a hood that makes it so that as long as we're obscured, our crit range expands by 1, meaning we now crit on an 18 or higher when circumstances are right. Continuing on, we decide to explore the local town, but as we head to the center, we find all the folks we sent off into the shadows earlier now as shadow-cursed undead. Since they were reanimated slightly weakened, it's easy enough to one-shot most of them. And of course, we never need to worry about getting hit by them in turn, since we have the ultimate defensive strategy. As a side note, if we want to make things even easier, we can always shoot them from a range so that we don't have to worry about positioning nearly as much. But Mr. Banks has always been more of a hands-on kind of guy. Once they're all out of the way, a statue catches our eye, and as we press down first the northern, then the western, and finally the eastern plaques at his base, a hidden passage opens up. Descending into the depths, we find a Sharan sanctuary with 3 statues inside. Each one has us make a saving throw for each mental stat, and after we pass them, we get a +5 to each corresponding stat until our next long rest. Feeling smarter than ever before, we keep exploring and find the golden Garen Gothay Thorm, and she wants gold the same way a fish wants water. Unfortunately for her, we're not willing to part with ours. She does immediately slam into us, and while she does more damage the more gold we have, we've been around long enough to know to stash our gold in safe places, not on our person. Our first turn is spent re-equipping the risky ring since we took it off for the statues and forgot to put it back on. Then we reposition far enough away that the enemies all dash to us. After that brief scare, we spend the rest of the combat using our little immortality trick to pick off the floating skulls one by one, weakening old Jerry in the process. Until she too bites the dust, with a crit hit no less to add insult to injury. And of course, we just can't help ourselves from robbing her toll house blind. A little further down the road, we find signs of a Dr. Thorm lurking about, but the nurse at the front desk won't let us in until we put on a rather convincing performance, the same one our kids use to play truant. When we actually get to see the doctor though, he's in the middle of torturing some poor dude, so rather than try and get answers from him, we convince him to let his nurses practice on himself instead. Which, oh man, if this is how they do surgery, they really do need the practice. Well, that's another Thorm down for the count. Let's see if we can keep this ball rolling. To no one's surprise, it's not hard to track down Thizabald Thorm at the local tavern. Unfortunately for us, he wants us to tell a story while slurping down whatever sludge he's cooked up. Our drinking days are far behind us, so we just pretend to guzzle his grog, but our storytelling is apparently not up to snuff, to the point where he wants to murder us for how bad it is. To mix things up, we decide to not be immortal for this fight, instead stabbing whichever patron is closest a couple times, then dashing super far away. This still makes us really hard to kill since the enemies always waste their turns dashing to reach us, but it's a nice change of pace. The main priority for the start is taking out Thizabald's drunken cronies, but we do occasionally hit the big man who is immune to our piercing damage, so only some of our damage riders actually hurt him. In order to make things go faster, we use a wall of fire scroll once everyone is bunched up in the center of the room, killing one of the zombies in a burning inferno and leaving the other two weak enough to take out with a couple of lucky crits on our next turn. Now with them out of the way, it's a mad kiting circuit that our mobile feet and cunning dash are made for. All it takes is a short eon, a buttload of patience, and even more stabs to poor Thizabald's ugly mug to finally finish off this cantankerous cursed centaur. Unfortunately, other than Ketheric, this means we're out of Thorms to slaughter and with no more answers than we started, but in honor of the families who used to live here, we get cleaning up the town. That means slaughtering some shadows and braining some overzealous zombies who were hiding a rather cool ring. Keep an eye on that one for the future. With the town mostly cleaned up, it's also about time we help with that whole freeing the prisoners thing that we told Barkus we'd do, and that starts by taking out the roaming scrying eyes. Then a strength elixir lets us yeet one of the guards into the pit, before getting the drop on another guard and giving him the old prison shank treatment. Even the warden is no exception to our massacre, and once she's out of the way, we free both the tiefling refugees as well as Barkus's deep gnomes that were imprisoned here, letting us all hop on a boat and sail to safety. We tell an ecstatic Barkus the good news, only for Wulbren Bongle to ruin the mood. Shoulda let him rot. Anyways, while we're here, we also chat with a flaming fist who tells us of a young boy named Thaniel in need of saving, who happens to also know Halsin, and as it turns out is also the key to lifting the shadow curse. Before that though, we find Arabella wandering in the dark and tell her she can crash at our camp for as long as she needs to. A moment later, we earn level 7, granting us a bit more HP, a bit more sneak attack damage, and the evasion feature. This means that from now on, when we succeed a dex save, we take 0 damage from whatever caused it, and should we fail, we only take half. A handy boost to our survivability should we find ourselves in need of it. Now that we're stronger and another kid is safe, we catch Halsin up who tells us he knows just what to do. So we prepare ourselves for what's to come with a scroll of Conjure Elemental and one of Minor Elemental, summoning both a Water Elemental and a couple of ice methods. Then Halsin tells us he's gonna pop open a portal and we'll have to defend it with our life. The second he's done talking, we enter turn-based mode and drop a darkness scroll right by the portal. And before you know it, the fight kicks off. Seeing all these enemies, we decide to down a Bloodlust elixir, followed by an Ice Storm scroll on a group of enemies, not killing, but hopefully making it harder for them to reach us. One of our methods goes down instantly, but the other uses a chromatic orb to cause a few undead to go slipping and sliding. Our own patch of ice works just as we'd hoped as well. Round 2 comes with even more enemies, and even more ice storms killing our own method, yet also triggering our elixir, letting us also use a Cone of Cold scroll, which admittedly doesn't do much, but a bonus action stab helps make up for it. We also use a speed potion to cast an ice knife scroll, taking out a shadow and making yet more slippery surface. The water elemental's ice blast takes out a few birds, yet somehow fails to refreeze the puddle of water from ice storm number 1. All of our foes that are close to the portal at least keep slipping. When it gets back to us, we use a beautiful lightning bolt scroll to take out a bunch of enemies, a bonus action stab to take out a shadow, and 2 whole fireball scrolls to blow up the farther enemies who were already injured. Unfortunately, the ice all melts now, meaning most of the survivors run right up to the portal. Our only solace is that a lot of the archers are hellbent on shooting the elemental instead. All we need to do now is survive this last round, so we take out the closest foes and refreeze the water with a Cone of Cold, and bonus action stab a goon right by the portal, while using our last couple actions to take out a Shadow Mastiff getting too close for comfort. Afterwards, we teleport our low health elemental back to tank some hits and body block the portal. Our worries are for naught though, as the enemy enemies can't even reach the portal, except when the counter should end, it just doesn't, which is extra bad news since we're lethargic. The elemental does its best, however there's not much we can do but watch as a couple enemies land blows against the portal. Thankfully it survives anyways and the fight finally ends. The young Thaniel is saved as Halsin returns with him in tow, but all is not quite right. It seems the boy is missing half of himself, hidden somewhere in these Shadow-Cursed lands. Sure enough, we find him in the form of Oliver, who is not so thrilled about the idea of rejoining his other half, and instead just dips through a portal. Naturally, we follow, and he's just waiting for a fight. We can't harm him directly without getting hit in return, but every time we take out one of his summons, we damage his barrier, so we get to work. Well, the boy makes sure we've got more than enough summons to take him out. Very quickly do we realize that if we take out enemies 2 at a time, we're gonna be here for quite a while, even if we're not at risk due to our immortality trick. So we use a wall of fire scroll to incinerate almost all of them who are active, and any future rounds of foes get spewed out right into the burner. Don't worry, they're not real kids. A few more rounds of that is all it takes to dispel his barrier, and now it's time for this whippersnapper to get a talking to. It seems he's afraid of being abandoned by his other half yet again, and that Thaniel may not even want him back in the first place since he's changed so much. We tell him that's all that growing up is just a little bit of change bit by bit, and that even though it's scary to say goodbye to who you used to be, you never truly lose that part of you, you just become more. And so Oliver agrees to grow up. No persuasion check required. From here, we just need to do one more thing to lift the curse, and Thaniel says it best.
Ketheric Thorm must die.
You know what that means. It's time to go into the mausoleum, where we encounter Raphael just waiting outside to greet us. He seems to enjoy just rambling on in incoherent riddles, but eventually we're able to get him to tell us that there's a devil in this mausoleum who is very dangerous. Something that we'll note, but we know this isn't coming from the kindness of his heart. Inside the mausoleum proper, we're able to find a hidden entrance relatively easy with just a couple button presses. But as we head deeper in, we find ourselves now in a whole Sharan gauntlet. The first doors are opened by pressing yet another button, this time by avoiding invisible walls by approaching from the east and then the south. Heading into the next room, we manage to get the jump on a cloaker, but it's rather alert and goes before us, spewing out a whole bunch of illusory copies of itself, one of which manages to frighten us. Since this is one of the few ways our immortality gets ruined, we just pop an invisibility potion to reset the situation. The next time we start up initiative, we manage to go first thanks to a vigilance elixir, and we have no problem entering and hiding on our fog cloud each round. All we gotta do is poke the cloaker full of holes with our trusty bow and arrow, and a rather frightening foe is solved. Mr. Banks lockpicks his way into the next room and finds a Sharan altar. We figure we might as well pray to this statue too, since every other one we've interacted with has blessed us. Sure enough, this one does as well, granting us resistance to all necrotic damage until our next rest. Continuing on, we find some friendly skeletons being puppeted by Balthazar. Then one of the skeletons starts talking about the old mother-in-law for some reason, immediately followed by some undead Sharans showing up just in time to get their butts whooped. On our first turn, we take out one of the portals they're spewing out of, then dash up to Balthi's bedroom door. Out comes pouring even more Sharan Justiciars as the round takes by. However, when it gets back to us, we use a scroll of knock on the not so secure door and open it up so that the no-show necromancer has to get himself in danger. We also take the time to break yet another portal. Now the chaos really starts as allies start missing enemies and enemies start murking allies. Before Balthi can join, we get another round and keep killing portals, and also start getting into the habit of being immortal at the end of our turns. Once he gets in the fight, things speed up even further, since he's throwing cloud kills left, right, and center. While this fight is pretty free at this point, we do need to be wary about stabbing the Justiciars themselves, since they send our radiant damage right back at us, well doubling it. For the most part, we sit back and watch the fireworks as Ketheric's bestie gets to work. To stymie the tide of oncoming Justiciars though, we do poke the odd portal here and there. Before you know it, things are getting close. It's the brothers Balthazar versus the siblings Sharan, and anyone could come out on on top. That is, until we decide to interfere and backstab the cultist while he's not looking. Not to mention Flesh, Balthazar's brother, gets in on the fun too, having gone completely berserk. As you could imagine, the nauseating necromancer doesn't last long after that, nor does his brother. This victory goes to the Sharans. But it's a short-lived one since there's only 2 of them left, and even a whole army couldn't touch Bobby Banks at this point. We still need to find that relic though, and it seems we'll need to start by doing these trials that were left for us, beginning with the soft step trial. All we need to do is sneak right over to the end of it, which we're so good at that we can literally walk right in front of the guards without worry. Then we lockpick the door at the very end in order to grab our first umbral gem, the key to moving forward.
Our next trial is the self-same. In order to beat this one, we just need to strip. Shame Mrs. Banks isn't here to see this. Then we sneak up on a clone of ourselves and yeah, that was pretty easy. Thus we obtain umbral gem numero dos. The last of our trials is the Faith Leap trial. For this one, all we need to do is walk onto an invisible pathway and jump from it right up to the statue. Then jump from statue to statue, back down to the platform, and right up to the end to grab our third umbral gem. Elsewhere in the gauntlet, we find a displacer beast that we track down to a whole host of devils just waiting to ambush us. Instead of hopping to arms, we try and have a chat with their leader Yurgir, since as it turns out he's also not Raffi's biggest fan. He sings us the contract that he made with Raphael in a rather drab performance, but we notice that he needs to kill those who've heard it, so we convince him to take out his Maragon followers, as well as his poor displacer beast, though when we try and convince him to take himself out, we don't quite hit the mark and the fight kicks off. Very quickly, we realize that for whatever reason, Yurgir can see through our tiny fog cloud, which means he can search for us, and when he fails to find us, end initiative. This happens over and over and over again, healing himself each time he does, until eventually, one time, we get caught out and he one-shots us with a crit. Before any of you say it's because of Devil's Sight, it's not. Here's us blinding him with the fog cloud later on. It's likely just due to his model size. Either way, we come back with a few elementals in tow thanks to some scrolls, who not only reveal Yurgir for us when he's invisible, letting us deal massive damage, but also keep him occupied so he doesn't end initiative trying to find us each round. With a couple of thugs working at our say-so, this fight is pretty easy. Who would have thought having a whole gang at your command is somewhat good? After clearing out the overgrown Orthon, we get our last umbral gem. With these 4, we can access the relic at the bottom of the gauntlet. Since that will no doubt piss off Ketheric, we start by assassinating his forces first. Even Zarel stands no chance going down before she can do anything. As we're going from room to room, we do end up finding a letter from Ketheric's dead wife, who clearly loved and would regret to see Ketheric as he is now. Regardless, the rest of Moonrise likewise is little more than fodder in our way. It doesn't matter who they are, they never see us coming, and they of course see nothing else afterwards. Our Moonrise Massacre grants us level 8 and our second feat in the form of Magic Initiate Wizard, letting us learn Longstrider, Minor Illusion, and Mage Hand. We would have preferred Savage Attacker, but at the time of recording it didn't work with Sneak Attack, so instead we decide to dabble in the Arcane Arts and make ourselves generally more useful. Since we have Longstrider to speed us up now, we also take the opportunity to switch out Crusher's Ring for the Eversight Ring from here on out, so we can still punch folks inside of our fog cloud. Now at last, it's time to descend to the depths of the gauntlet and find this relic, opening the final door with all of the umbral gems that we've acquired. Behind this door is a portal to the Shadowfell that we carefully walk into, and when we awake on the other side, we find not a relic, but a lone figure imprisoned in the depths. We lay a hand on the Night Song in companionship, and now both the Night Song and Ketheric's immortality are no more, as the demigod daughter of Selûne, Dame Aelin, is reborn. It's time to go hunt us down just one more Thorm. Of course, when we arrive at the tower, it's already filled with corpses, so the Harpers really don't have much to worry about. That being said, we're not the only retired expert who has a bone to pick with Ketheric, so Jaheira joins us too. Upon arriving
at the top of the tower, we find a less than happy and certainly not immortal Papa Thorm. Using the knowledge of the note we gained earlier and our own experience, we're able to convince him that nothing can't be undone by a good woman's love, and it seems like he's actually about to repent his actions, only for our newest angelic ally to show up just in time to ruin things and start a fight. When things kick off, we start by stabbing the nearby Mistress of Souls, making sure to go immortal at the end of our turns, while Jaheira rains down an icy hell on all of the necromites. Aylin gets blasted in return, but let's be real, she kinda deserves it. Unfortunately, she's not the only one getting walloped by the bad guys. On our next turn, we fail to kill the necromancer, even with Jaheira helping, but we do make Ketheric slip on his bony booty. Not to mention, Aylin also frightens the poor guy after he spends his turn just standing up. Thanks to our new ring, we're able to execute Sasdera without even leaving our cloud, and Jaheira wild shapes into a panther to hopefully not die. Our dear friend the Night Song is not quite so lucky, but she is immortal, so she's only dying for like half a second. Until, of course, she gets knocked down another half second later. The fight ticks on like this, with us poking Ketheric down bit by bit, and Jaheira, well, she also slowly dies, unfortunately faster than the big man does. And only a couple shots later, we manage to deal enough damage to send our elderly enemy into a cutscene, wherein he immediately summons a big old tentacle and uses it to one-shot Aylin, but we both know he didn't need a cutscene for that, before teleporting away to who knows where, leaving us to finish off his necromites. Once the scuffle is all done, we jump into the big old hole that the tentacle left behind and find ourselves in a mind flayer colony. Well, here we get slaughtering every wandering intellect devourer that we can, since they're basically walking bags of experience. During our massacre, we end up stumbling into a laboratory very filled with fiends and undead. As scary as this would be to anyone who isn't Rob Banks, we still need to take out the Death Shepherd first, since they have the fun ability to revive any other enemy once per round. In just a few turns of our own, we manage to get the job done, and from there it's as easy as pie to clean up the rest of the gang. Elsewhere in the colony, we find ourselves in a room full of pods containing both enemy mind flayers and captive allies, including our old pal Zevlor. Naturally, we gotta free them, but this does mean freeing the mind flayers too. Thankfully, our newly emancipated amigos do a pretty good job of fending for themselves, and the mind flayers pass their turns since I guess they're overwhelmed by fear due to not being able to find us. All this means is that the slaughter gets to continue uninterrupted by something as unimportant as an enemy turn. Now there's nothing left to do but face Ketheric again. Beforehand, we get ready by putting on all of our saving throw boosting gear, as well as the Nair Misser to deal force damage so we don't have to worry about damage resistance. Then at last, we sneak our way towards the boss man, only to find him talking to Gortash and Orin, the other two chosen of the Absolute. They do a whole Powerpuff Girl routine, and we find out that not only is the Absolute secretly an Elder Brain, but it's actually being controlled by these three using some shiny rocks. Thankfully, the other two teleport away, leaving poor old Mr. Thorm nice and vulnerable. Once they're gone, we do a bit more prep in the form of downing both a flying and an invisibility potion to let us sneak up on this Illithid, and we stab the squid-faced bozo for a surprise round. Unfortunately, we get caught by Ketheric's most powerful move, the Yap attack, before anything else can happen. We take the chance to try and convince him to see reason one more time, but our efforts fall short, and now the fight is on for real. The remainder of our surprise round gets used, launching a sneak attack on the Mind Flayer, and our next turn is just a bit more damage before, as usual, turning immortal, something we'll be doing every round for the first part of this fight. Next round we finish off the Illithid, and the following one is spent freeing Dame Aylin to make Ketheric mortal again. She takes the opportunity to show these dastardly intellect devourers what for, right up until she whacks one too many necromites and is essentially knocked out of the fight. At least Special K over here can't do a darn thing to us while we slowly but surely poke him down. Goodness gracious, would somebody get me a Staples button? Cause wait, did he just jump into that pit? Oh, okay, so you're telling me we've just gotta fight a god of death? Well, that's no problem. Ain't nothing that Bobby Banks hasn't seen before. We start by using a speed potion to cast the fog cloud from our Hammergrim Mist amulet, which has the unique property of not requiring concentration. Then, of course, we hide in it, not realizing that the big man's Call of the Damned will break our stealth. Thankfully, neither Merkel nor his followers actually shoot into the fog cloud despite being able to. Not sure why, but I'm not one to look a gift Merkel in the mouth. So we get to drop a wall of fire scroll right on top of him, hopefully also damaging any of his goons that get too close, followed by an acid arrow to reduce his AC going forwards. Now we just stay safe and sound in our cloud, peppering him with bolts until eventually he gets low enough health to start eating his necromites, healing for a butt ton in the process, and giving access to Finger of Death, which he does use through the fog cloud for some reason. To make matters worse, he's also spawning hordes of necromites every turn. Given this new development, we start hanging out in a darkness cloud instead, since this is actually Finger of Death immune. There's nothing we can do to stop his healing, so we start chugging speed pots and devoting every last action and bonus action that we can to shooting him, keeping our HP topped up with healing pots when we can. We do outpace his healing, but not by much, and he still manages to eat the 8th and final necromite before we finally take him out for good. Not even a god of death will keep us from our family, all in a day's work. Literally, in this case, we didn't rest a single time in the Shadowcurse lands. From here, we yoink Kethric's shiny little netherstone, reunite Aelin with her long-lost lover, put all of our proper gear right back on, and continue onwards to the city of Baldur's Gate. Yet as we set out to save the world, we look back and know that even if we fail, at least we saved just one more kid. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the second leg of Bobby Banks' journey. By the time this video is up, there should be a poll up for the next class that I'll be playing, so go vote in that. And as always, a special thanks to our Storyteller tier members, Bunny Warren, Damon, Shirtles, Mark Rainbow, Vivian, Garrett Sapp, Rat King, Lovely Velvet, Apricot Antlers, Beltfed Joe, Lumina, Chancine, Game Life Coaching, El Guardia, Cluck Vader, and Cody Lumi.